Welcome. My name is Karen Hoskin. I'm the Executive Director of the Association, and Karen Gimnig is here tonight as well, the Assistant Director. I'll plug in our contact information in the chat if you want to contact us for any reason or just to simply say hi. You're welcome as well. Coho US is super happy to have you guys here. We're really excited to be able to offer things such as these web chats. We've heard, particularly when we are spending time with people in Portland, we heard just really great feedback from people that they're really enjoying these web chats. We have an amazing new website. If you haven't had a chance to see it, I just put the link in the chat so you can take a look at that. If you are a community that is already has been listed in our communities directory, perhaps on the old website. On the new website, we're putting new and improved community listings. So some old information was ported from the old site to the new site, but we're putting in brand shiny new listings. So if you're not there and you want to be, I put the link in the chat for you. And of course, if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact Karen or I about how to do it or when would be appropriate to do it. Also, I just wanted to let you all know, I'm kind of guessing that there will be people tonight that are from new or newly forming communities. And we're pretty excited to be launching a new program through Coho US, which is a communities launch program. And it just kind of helps guide you through how to get the word out, which is a part of what the big topic is tonight. It's just one little way that we can help you out. I went ahead and put the link to that in the chat as well. So the plan tonight is there's going to be a presentation by Shelly and then some time for questions and answers. So Shelly Parks is, well, one of the burning souls of Skagit Cohousing, I guess you would say. Founder, the person, the leader of Covision Consulting, and an affiliate of Katie McCamit's Cohousing Solutions program. And she'll be talking tonight about how to host a great marketing event.
You know, Karen, I just want to thank you and also Karen just for doing all these, because you know, when I work with groups and help them with their marketing and their recruitment of their members, one of the questions I always ask is where are your interested people coming from? And the number one answer is always the Coho US site. It's when people are doing searches. So just thank you for your work. Thank you for having these be available as a resource to groups that are getting going. So good. So I do have a slideshow that I'll pull up in a minute here, but let me just give you all just a very quick little bit of my background. I spent my career working, leading sales and marketing teams in continuing care retirement communities. That's what I did for a long time. And a lot of those projects were big startup projects. So there was a lot of pressure to pre-sell in order to make the happy to get these projects off the ground. And probably about 5 years ago, I started asking myself the question of, would I live in the retirement communities where I worked? And I really kind of had a little bit of a crisis in my career, because I realized that that was not how I wanted to live out my life down the road. So I started doing research, and in my research one night, I stumbled upon Cohousing. And it was just one of those life-changing evenings where I realized, you know, I found the answer. You know, this is what I've been looking for. And it was right before the conference that was in Salt Lake City, which there was a focus on senior co-housing. So I went to that conference, was able to connect with Katie McCamit there, and she invited me into her 500 Communities program. And so about 2 years ago, I left my career job and now have a consulting business where I work with groups and helping them in their marketing, but also in their sales. I really believe that you know, co-housers tend to do a pretty decent job of marketing their communities because they're excited, they're enthused. But what happens when they capture someone's interest, and how do they move them along the process to committing to membership? And I think that's where I do a lot of work. And so this whole idea for this talk, when Karen Gimnig called me, I had just been thinking about the day before about an event we had done for Skagit Cohousing. And I just, I picked up on some things at the event that I thought, we really could have done that better. So I quickly jotted down my notes from that event. And then Karen called me, I think it was the next day after I'd done that. So it was at the top of my mind. And I said, yeah, there are definitely some things that I could share about both from my professional background, but also what I've been learning as a member of a developing co-housing group about how do you, when you capture someone's attention and you get them to an event, what does that look like to try and have, continue the relationship with them in a real positive way. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slide here, which will be a little bit easier for you. And I always struggle with this just a little bit because it's harder for me to see your faces, and I always feel like I'm talking to a weird computer screen. So we'll do our best here. But we're just let me give you an overview of the different things we're going to cover. And each one of these points is just very brief. But we're going to look at what kind of events should you consider choosing a venue. Who are the key people that you want to have in place when you do an event? What does it mean to be able to do your discovery and ask good questions? To be careful with mismatching. I always talk about this with groups, so we'll dive into that for a few minutes. We're going to talk about the one-person rule, which will make more sense to you in a minute. How do you create next steps? And you want to make sure that you don't forget the most important thing. And what does follow-up look like? What are some tips when you're doing a site tour? What about potlucks? And you don't want to forget the introverts. And then I have a couple last thoughts. So let's just go ahead and dive in. So, there are lots of different events that you can do to capture people's attention. And so this is just the list that came to the top of my mind as I was thinking of the ones that are most successful that I've seen or comment on some. Of course, if you have your site, it's always really great to be able to have tours of the site because that helps people imagine it. If you don't have your site yet, then just doing information meetings where you can gather people together and talk about the details of your project. You can do those both in person, which is always the best, but if it looks like you're starting to attract people from other parts of the country, we've been having really, really great success doing a monthly Zoom information call. And we've really enjoyed doing those. And that way people from other parts of the country can learn about Skagit Cohousing, and that's been really great. Coffee and conversations are a real casual way to gather people together. I think one of the things I like about coffee and conversations is they are casual, and people can come together and you can talk about what your vision is for your community and what it looks like. But I think one of the problems can also be that it's almost too unstructured, and I think sometimes it can be difficult to sort of guide people to the next step with that. So my advice to you would be, if you're doing coffee conversations and you feel like they're not being successful, you might pull them off of your event calendar for a couple of months and then maybe come back in and do them. But all of these you don't have to be stuck on. You can always take them off of your event calendar if you find they're not working. It's always great to come up with some what I call general events. And those are things like where you have an opportunity to maybe bring in a downsizing expert, or if you're a community that is doing, has farming as part of your community, maybe having someone come in and talk about permaculture. You can do larger, just basic intros to co-housing where you're not necessarily focusing on your particular project, but more focusing on co-housing in general. And what I like about these is sometimes you can draw different people in that you might not draw from just doing an information meeting on your project or a coffee and conversation. And it's always nice to get those get those friends of our projects that are supporters and think it's really cool what we're doing, but they would never move in, but they still are supportive. So that's a way to get those people into your database and your mailing list. making room for social opportunities. And this is really important. I would say, if I could put a star on this right now, I would. We tend to focus on all these events where we can tell people about our community and our project, but what does it look like to have those smaller, more intimate, having someone over for dinner in your house, or calling them up and going for a bike ride. You can see the picture. There's a picture of us on our bikes, and this was two of our explorers that were living in Seattle, and I knew one of them had not been on a bike in a long time, and the other one rides a lot, and so we all decided to go for a really fun bike ride in Seattle one day. And it was on that trip that the gal on the right, Sarah, told me she was moving to membership. So I was pretty excited about that. But I really do think it was, we didn't talk about Skagit Cohousing. We didn't, other than when we were riding along, and she said, "Oh, I've decided I'm moving to membership." So that was really great. But it's all about connecting with people, and we need to do that many, many times as we're working with people and having them make the decision to join us, because it's a big decision to join a community. So opening up those places where we can more intimately connect is really helpful in small groups. I love the idea of potlucks, but I did hear someone say one time, and I'll share this with you, maybe you've heard it, that they were careful about doing potlucks because it really didn't represent what they were envisioning for their community when it opened. They said, we plan on doing where someone will cook a meal, and then another person will cook a meal the next night, rather than always doing potlucks. And by always doing potlucks, we're showing that everybody has to contribute something to every meal, and that wasn't what they wanted to convey. So, you just think about that. And then, of course, fun events. We did an ice cream social one time on the property for Skagit Cohousing, and it was really, really successful. And it was just a fun event. And, we ended up doing little mini information meeting kind of sessions as people stood around. But the focus was just to do something fun. It wasn't to necessarily give people all the information that they needed to have about Skagit Cohousing. I put meetups on here because we do not do meetups right now with Skagit Cohousing. I've worked with some groups that have really struggled with doing meetups. They will often get quite a few people attending, but they're finding that it's really hard to qualify the people that are coming. And you just have people that show up, and you're spending time and energy doing something that maybe might not really be an effective use of your time in terms of capturing those people that will actually decide to join your community. So you might judge if you're doing meetups. Just ask yourself, are you getting the sort of people attending that would actually move forward? Because our time is really limited, so you have to be smart about how you use your time. And I put meetings on here because I'm a firm believer in not using meetings as a marketing event. I think that meetings are, first of all, they're not always fun to sit through. If you're sitting through a business meeting, it's not always fun. And I also like the idea of keeping meetings as a benefit if someone makes the first step in commitment. And I think we've also run into challenges when we have invited people to our meetings that haven't committed, is they don't understand necessarily what's going on, so they're asking questions, and it's really easy for the meeting to get sidetracked. So I really prefer the idea with meetings is that you don't use those as a way for people to get to know you. You use those as a way for, once they have made some kind of a commitment to moving forward with you, then they can attend the meetings. And then you also have that opportunity to do a little bit of orientation with them and talk about what the expectations might be at the meetings. So that's some thoughts on events. Let's talk about choosing a venue. And this comes from Annie Russell, one of my mentors in co-housing marketing, and she talks about this better than I do, but I agree with her totally on this, is to be really careful with where you are holding your events. We tend to, especially as our projects are getting started, money is really tight, so we're looking for those places where we can hold our meetings that are hopefully free. And many times, I don't know if they look as bad as this picture that I have on the left, but I have been to meeting rooms that are not much better than that. And, you know, just be aware that when people are coming to any of your events, they're checking you out. You know, they're really wanting to decide, is this the community I want to get involved with? And I think, you know, we all dream of having a beautiful common house someday, but if we're sitting in a, you know, a dark basement in a, you know, a beautiful old church, but the basement might be really dark and, you know, smell like an, you know, old room, we're not really conveying what we want people to be envisioning of what it will be. And I know Annie Russell would say this is a place that you want to spend money when you're getting started, so that you can have those good venues. Assigning key people, and I wrote facilitator or a tour guide and a secretary. And this is one of the things that came out of that event we did, where we didn't do this very well. And so you definitely want to have 2 key people when you're doing any kind of event. And so you want to have, you know, if you're just doing an event where maybe an information meeting or something, you know, that would be a facilitator. Or if you're touring a site, you want to have a tour guide. But basically, it's the person that's going to keep things on track. It's going to making sure that questions are getting answered. We'll also be taking the temperature of the interaction. So you definitely want to have a person in this role that can kind of read a group pretty well. You want this person to be a really warm, welcoming face. And I'd like to add that the facilitator or the tour guide doesn't have to be the person that's answering all the questions, but it will be the person that will help you look like you know what you're doing. And this will really help give people the assurance that you're a project that knows what you're doing and you're moving forward. So, you know, especially as projects get going, there's just so much going on that there is not one person that can know everything. So I know I often, if I'm facilitating some kind of event or meeting, I really try to get somebody from the design and the development team there, so that if those questions are asked, I can say, great question, you know, Jerry, can you answer that? So it doesn't, you know, don't stress if you're trying to figure out who would be the good person. It doesn't need to be a person that knows everything. It just needs to be a person that will be a good, you know, a good people person that can read the temperature of the group and then also manage things. And then you want a secretary, and the secretary's role is to make sure that you get contact information and phone numbers from everybody who's there. But it's also, more importantly, the person that will keep track of any questions that are being asked, because that's really important. Because if people are asking questions, they're expressing interest. So the role of a secretary would be, oh, you know, Mary asked the question about, you know, what will be our dog policy? You know, so now we have a little bit of piece of information about Mary, and when we follow up, we can then, you know, use that information. So it's really important to have one person that's in charge of just having a, you know, clipboard or a notepad to be able to jot those things down. Which then leads me into, you know, asking questions and what I call discovery, and also being wary of mismatching. You know, we just talked about the key people that make an event a success, but let's talk about ways that you can make the most about being in front of people. And, you know, we often think of events as a way for us to introduce our project to other people, but I'd like to challenge you and instead, you know, switch your thinking and really think of events as a way for you to get to know interested people. So we're switching it. And it's a common problem of where co-housers get together and they're so excited about their project and they're just, you know, spilling all this information out, but they're not taking time to understand the people that are coming, what's driving them, you know, what is it that they're interested in knowing about, and how do we capture that? And it's, you know, that rule that, you know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So just always keep that in mind when you do these events. So I think, just the rule of making sure that you have some kind of opening for your event, where you can have a round where everyone gets to introduce themselves and share maybe about how they heard about the event. That's always valuable information for you to gather. Asking the question, what most interests you about co-housing, and what would you most like to learn today? And then again, if your secretary is taking notes, you're able to gather a lot of really, really valuable information in what people say. If you're in a casual setting, like maybe a coffee and conversation, it can be really helpful to gather questions before you start answering them, like popcorn style. So to say, so what questions do people have around the table? And, Mary gives her questions, and Sue gives her questions, and Tom gives his questions. And then you can gather them and see if you have some themes, and then you can structure answering. It sounds like we've got most people interested in, what does our time frame look like? Let me go ahead and address that first. So again, that's where your secretary can really help a facilitator. And I call that, just so you know, the term that we use in the professional, sales field, is that's when you have the opportunity to do discovery. You're discovering something about the people that are showing interest, and that information can be really helpful. I say be wary of mismatching, because this is just like so classic in co-housing communities. We all do it, and I do it all the time, and I try to be careful of it. And it's when someone asks you a question about something, and then you answer in a different way than what they asked their question. So let's say someone asks about, so how many floor plans do you expect to have? And you might answer quickly, but then you start telling them about the pricing, and they maybe in their head, they weren't even interested in pricing. So you've got to be really careful about listening well and answering the questions that people actually have. Another way that we see this play out, which is really common, is, I'll give you a scenario. Imagine that a person comes to an information meeting and they heard that you're going to have community meals together, and that really stresses them because they have a lot of food allergies and they're very private about their food allergies. They don't like to talk about it. And so, you start talking with them and you're not asking about what's drawing them. Do they have any concerns, or what are their thoughts? And instead you start like talking about how great it's going to be to have all these community meals together, and you can't wait to be having meals together 4 times a week. And that person's thinking, I can't do this, and you don't even know that you did that, right? So that's called mismatching. So something to be really, really mindful of. I wrote on my notes that I'm looking at, I said, important, only one person to answer a question. This is kind of one of the things that just really bothers me, because I think whenever this happens, an organization doesn't look very professional. It's also really disrespectful. So let's imagine I'm doing a site tour, and someone asks a question, and I'm acting as the facilitator. So maybe I answer the question, but then somebody in my group also answers how they think they should answer that question. And then someone else answers and thinks they should answer the question. And all of a sudden we just spent 15 minutes on a really, really simple answer, and we just sucked up a lot of energy and time in the room. So be mindful if if your group tends to do that. Just say, let's just stick with one person. I always tell people that, if I say something that's incorrect, because we do that, right? Sometimes things come out of our mouths that we don't mean to say, then please interrupt me and clarify, but don't just keep answering it, because that is also a great opportunity afterwards to be able, as you're maybe mingling socially, say, I know Shelley, talked about the dog policy, but, another some more information on that is this. So it gives a chance to connect with people later. And creating next steps, really, really important. To anytime you do an event, you want to know what are the next steps that you can communicate to someone, so that they have a next thing to do. So for instance, you know, if it's a site tour, you might, you know, say, you know, we're also, this would be the time we talk about what are the steps to become what we call an explorer, which is the first step with Skagit Cohousing. But if you're maybe, you know, doing an online information meeting, maybe the next steps are, you know, we are going to be having an event coming up in a couple of months that's the whole weekend. And if you live out of state, maybe you'd like to fly in and join us and, you know, give information about that. But you always want to be mindful of letting people know what the next thing is that they can do when they're at any kind of event you're doing. I wrote, don't forget the most important thing. Make sure you gather information. This is something that happens to all of us all the time, right? You do an event and afterwards you realize like, oh no, we didn't get the names of the people here, or we forgot to get people's phone numbers. So that's, again, going back to the secretary. If you've got a person assigned to it, you'll likely not forget to do that. But do not let people get away without getting some information from them, and preferably getting phone numbers so that you can call them back. Let's see. I believe this comes back to my professional background, that it's important, if anybody makes the effort to attend any kind of event you do, to try to follow up within 24 hours. Ideally, that would be a quick phone call to just say, it was so great to have you, and, you know, would love to. Sometimes people have questions after they come to an information meeting and just wanted to reach out to you. You just, you know, if you have to, you can do an email, but I always tell groups that I work with that email is not a meaningful conversation with anybody. It really needs to be a conversation, which is hard to do through email. So schedule time after you do an event to do that follow-up work. If it's a really large event, you'll probably need to get a couple of people in your community on that, and give them the tools that they need to be able to do that. Just a couple of site tour tips. You know, one of the things that is really helpful if you have a site is being able to paint a picture of what it will look like. And you probably have some people that are, you know, members of your group that do that better than others. But if you can, I know one time I was on our site walking around, and, you know, we stopped in a place and I just sort of joked. I said, I think I'm standing in my unit. And she just laughed, and then she goes, well, I'm interested in this. Like, where would that be? So I was like, I don't know, let's figure it out. And so we walked to that place and we stood there, and it was a really fun time to just get her to picture it. And that takes a little bit of effort to really think about how you can do that. But the one thing you don't want to do is, if you're doing a site tour, is you don't want to walk and talk with a group of people, because too many people can't hear and they don't know what's going on. So if you're walking around a site, make sure you act like a tour guide in a you know, museum, and stop and make sure people are gathered around you and that everyone can see your face, and you can talk with people together. I was recently witnessing a site tour, and it looked like a mother duckling with all the ducklings following. And what happened was all the little ducklings were starting to have side conversations, and it was very hard to get everybody back together. So just treat it like you've got a museum tour. You know, and I already talked a little bit about potlucks, because I think, you know, it's really easy to think that potlucks are the best way for you to really show what your community is all about, and just, you know, think about that. Don't get into the potluck rut and always be doing potlucks for your events, and that's kind of the main thing that you do. You know, you definitely want to offer some other things, but also, you know, if you're going to be a community that is mainly going to be doing potlucks and not doing meals where, you know, one or two people are serving meals, then maybe potlucks are great. But just be mindful about how people perceive them. And let's see. Oh, remember the introverts. You know, this is, in co-housing, we tend to, especially as we're developing, we tend to show a lot of pictures where we're big groups together having a great time. And we know, the research tells us, that more introverts are attracted to co-housing than extroverts. So we just need to be mindful of, first of all, showing images if we're doing events where it's not these big groups of people, because that can be scary for introverts, but also making sure that we, doing those smaller events like we talked about, so where the introverts can feel like they learn about what you're doing and feel connected. And just one more thought, and then we'll open it up. So last thoughts. We're excited about what we're doing, and we want to give a lot of information about our project. And we feel like the more information someone has, the better they can make a decision about moving forward with us. The problem with it is that too much information just overwhelms people. If they start feeling overwhelmed, it's really easy for people to mishear what you've said. And it doesn't give another reason for them to have another encounter with you. And we want people to have many opportunities to connect with us. So if we give everything away at one time, why would they take the time to come back and see us? So just, you don't have to give away everything at every event. And that falls into the idea of being able to offer people the next steps. You can offer more information at their next step. And if they're truly interested, they will take that next step with you. So basically it's just stop talking. If you're talking too much, just stop talking, which leads me into questions. I would love to get some questions. So let me close my screen out and would love to hear what's on people's thoughts, or hear what's on their minds, I guess. Let's see, we got.
So you should each be able to unmute yourself if you have a question. And if you have a question you can't figure it out, go like this.
One of the problems we had is that we did everything wrong that you mentioned there pretty well, got that perfected and out of the way. So what we did was we forgot to get information, and then we did get the information, and we gave them the choice of email or phone, and of course no one picked the phone, so we lost that chance again. So what do we do now to remedy that? Because that was one of our two big events, and we do have all these emails, and I did send out messages pretty well, a block of one message to everyone, which was not very effective. Mm-hmm. Is there any way that I can recover from that, or we can recover from that?
Yeah, let me ask you, how long ago was it when you did the events?
Well, the last one was March 24th.
Okay, so pretty recently.
And then the other one before that was about 2 years.
Oh, okay, so ways back. I always encourage people to not do group emails, but it takes a lot of effort and time, although you can have your text and just copy it in, but do personal emails to people and just say, and I would always start off by saying, this is Shelly Parks with Skagit Cohousing, and you came to mind today, and I would love to just chat with you on the phone for a couple minutes if you have a minute, and just share what your thoughts are about co-housing and give you an update if you're interested. And I don't know if you all caught what I just said, but what I said was talk with you about your interest in co-housing. What you want to do is make it very general and not say your interest in Skagit co-housing, because now you all of a sudden just put somebody really on the spot, so you want to make it a general statement. Okay. And I'm actually pretty surprised how often not everybody responds, but it's actually pretty surprising how many people will email back and say, yeah, I would love to talk, so give them some opportunities. All right. That's really the only thing you can do.
Thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I'll do that. Mm-hmm.
What other questions are out there?
I have a question. How soon do you talk about money, and how do you filter out the dreamers?
Yeah, great question, Dean. Thank you. I try to talk about money pretty quickly, and we'll talk just a little bit more about what that looks like. But I do try to do it quickly because for a couple reasons. One is I don't want to lead someone on before, have them get really excited and then they find out they can't afford it. And also, my time is really limited. So I want to be able to see if this is going to work financially, because, before we go down the road too much. So I don't always, I usually try and not send out pricing information via email. I try not to send that out. I try to wait until I have a phone call with someone. And I will usually say, and people will usually ask, but I'll usually word it in a way. I'll say, like, our prices start around $300,000. Is that within your budget? So I don't give them the price range, because people all of a sudden their brains will jump to the top end. So I will start at the low end, and usually pretty quickly you'll hear a response like, oh yeah, that's okay. And then maybe they'll ask for more questions about, what size of a home is that? Or they'll say something like, oh gosh, I've been renting the last 20 years and I only have $10,000 in savings and I live on, Social Security. Well, now that they're probably it's not gonna be a good fit. So it right away. And, then you can gently, figure out how you're gonna have that conversation with them. But I like to try to figure out if people are, can afford to be part of my community up front, so that it doesn't waste their time and doesn't, take up my time. And it's okay to ask those questions. We're uncomfortable with it because we don't do that, but you're representing essentially a development, so it's okay to say, is that within your budget? Is that helpful? What other questions?
That was good,
Shelly, and this is Susie in Tulsa.
Okay. Go ahead, Susie. I think Dean might have had a comment, but go ahead.
There's a presentation where you're kind of, people may not always know a lot about co-housing. Mm-hmm. And so you're sharing some about co-housing and about the community. And then, there's other times where they already know and you're talking more about your community. But either way, how long should I get confused on how much information to parcel out at what point in that whole thing of not trying to tell them everything, and yet sometimes the questions lead you into telling them everything. Yeah.
Well, we know the rule is about 20 minutes, right? That's the longest you keep people's attention. Yeah. So now it's really hard, right? But I know if I'm pulling together a presentation, I try and keep it less than 40 minutes for sure, with time, and then time for questions afterwards, or ways for people, or break it up for ways for people to interact. That's always helpful. If you have to go longer, take time to have it interactive mid time. But again, you don't have to give away everything. You don't have to give people all of the information, each time. Great question.
I have a question.
Yes.
We're forming, and the questions that we get put to us at the information session, we don't have land. We have so few people, and sometimes we're almost embarrassed because I think people are used to the traditional model where a private developer has a sample display suite to show them, and that's the mindset we're dealing with.
Uh-huh.
And and maybe perhaps we don't seem that credible, but I mean we have to be honest.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was definitely, I was sort of in my frame of mind in a community that has property now. But I think that goes back to what I was talking about connecting with people, and not necessarily trying to give them so much information, because you don't have a lot of information to give at this point,
exactly.
Right? So I would really focus on what are the ways, that you can convey co-housing as a general concept, and that this is our dream. We want to make this happen, and who is interested in being part of this dream with us and taking the first steps to make it happen, and then really connecting with people. And you definitely want to have something in place for them to take a next step. So because you need to get people plugged in and committed in some way. But that's probably another web chat to talk about that in more detail. But there's so much rich information to share about co-housing. What's the value of co-housing? So just spreading the word, building your database, and then really working hard and connecting with those people that seem most interested, and then working on giving them a next step. Does that help?
Yeah, but it's still a huge challenge. Huge.
It is, and every group goes through it.
Because people are so used to, those decisions have been made by the developer. They just go in there, that their mindset. They're at least here in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Well, don't you have drawings to show me? Don't you have? That's what. No. And we, with co-housing, the whole idea is that you as a, community member will have input into that, and with some people that they just can't get that through their head.
Yeah, and there will always be those people that are not comfortable with that part, but they will be comfortable down the road later. So that's why you always want to make sure you keep your database, of your interested people. You want to really treat that as gold and manage that in a good way, and make sure you put information about people in there. But you're gonna have to mine for those risk takers that are willing to take a leap of faith with you, and it is hard. But they're out there, and there are people that are excited. I know Katie McCammett would say that it's oftentimes people that have been business owners or have done those kinds of things in their life where they've had to be out there and sort of take a risk. They're often good candidates for those early people.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm glad you did.
I think David has a question.
Hello?
Did you unmute?
Yeah, I did.
You are unmuted.
Okay.
Good. This is David Berwin at Mountain View Cohousing Community. We're in Silicon Valley, and one of our when we formed our group, one of the major issues was land. And I think that it's pretty hard to get people, at least in this area, interested unless you've got land. And so for the person who's talking about things being very vague, I think that maybe her best approach is to figure out how to get the land, whether it's an auction or something along those lines. And then at that point, there's a goal of getting people together to be able to, let's say, exercise the option, purchase the land, and then get into the design workshops with Chuck Direct kind of thing, and kind of lay out that whole story. And I think that might be a good way for her to sort of structure what she's trying to do.
Yeah, thank you, David, for bringing that. And that brings, with a lot of groups I work with, one of the things that happens with them is they will often tell themselves, when we have 10 committed members, then we'll go find a piece of property. And I always encourage them to try just what you said, to try to get going earlier on. And that's a real scary thing. When you're just a few households, that can be really scary. But it's amazing. There are landowners out there that we have one for Skagit Cohousing that's a friendly seller and has been working with us and holding the contract on our land for us while we could pull things together. So there are ways to think creatively, but I always encourage groups to, if you are serious and you're going forward, act like you're serious and going forward. And it's kind of the motto of, fake it till you make it, because groups, outsiders they look to see, is this group serious? Are they making it happen? If I invest my money early on in this project, will my money be safe? And so they're weighing their bets. And so whatever you can do to look like, move forward, do that. So.
This is John from Tulsa. Got a question. Dean had mentioned, and I think maybe you just forgot about it. He wanted to know about, what do you do about dreamers? We had some issues with that early on in our community.
Yeah. So I guess I'd like a little bit of clarification. Are they dreamers that are just dreaming about co-housing and maybe don't have the finances to take the project forward? Is that what you mean? Is that the clarification? That
Some of that, also people who have almost an agenda. They're wanting to be more back to the earth, permaculture, things we really weren't. And they kind of keep pushing it and pushing it, and you get to the point where you just have to, this isn't who we are.
Yeah. So two comments to address on that. I mean, it is really, really hard, I think, for both the dreamers and for us, if they really, really want to be in co-housing. And this sounds a little black and white and harsh, and I'm sorry. It might for some people, but especially for projects are getting themselves off the ground. It's been my experience that you do need the people that can get it off the ground. And dreamers can be really valuable because they can be wonderful advocates and can be out there spreading the word. But it does need to be a clear relationship of what are they is there going to be a way that you can work with them in some way? Maybe there's another member that can help get them into the community by helping them with their down payment or something. And there's lots of creative ways to do that. So you always have to, think outside the box. So I think, if it's the money issue, you just have to, within your community, figure out, what that looks like for your community, and what's, what can you do and work with that, and be really, really clear about that. Have those tough conversations. But then for the people that have a different vision, I mean, I think that's why it's always important when you're doing these events to be conveying what is the vision that your community has, and what is of value to your community, so that if people are wanting something different, the goal would be that they would self-select themselves out before you're in a position of needing to say, this group is not heading in that direction. So, but those are tough conversations, and and you can only have those tough conversations if you have relationships with people. So do your best to form those relationships so that you can have those conversations. I think we're almost out of time.
We have just a couple of minutes. Does anybody else have questions or comments?
I have a comment. I remember from learning about interviewing that I should always consider my purpose in an interview to get the next interview. It might apply here too, like the follow-up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Always want to leave the door open for the next thing. Good. Well, can I make go ahead.
Can I jump in? I'm still not sure how you do this, but anyway,
Yeah.
What would be amazingly helpful, as I'm hearing you speak, is to have a kind of little scripts, because when you say it, there's so much in there in a compact way, and like I might be able to pull off half of it, but I have people on my committee who can't.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I mean? To just be able to practice those kind of wordings and stuff would be, I think, immensely helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, you definitely have a lot of years. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. Yeah. Well, I have to say you were a lovely group. When I was seeing your little pictures along my screen, it was really nice for those of you that had your camera going, it was really nice to be able to see your faces. I just want to thank you all for taking the time tonight to do this. It was really fun for me to think about what I would like to share. And again, thank you so much, Karin and Karen, for your support and help, and then all that you do. And thanks for the association. None of us would be here without this association. So thank you for the association.
Okay. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it. Got lots out of it.
Good.
Thank you so much, Shelley. So typically Karen does her magic and is able to upload this to the website and our YouTube channel within a few days. And Shelly, if we can make sure to include your slide presentation, that would be great.
Should I send that to both of you too, just so either one of you that's going to? Okay. And should I turn it into a PDF and then send it to you? Is that the way to do it? Okay, I will do that. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah. So upcoming web chats. The next one is Rains Cone and Betsy Morris with the topic, So You Want to Buy a House in Co-Housing. And that will be next Wednesday, the 17th. And then the following week, Thursday, the 25th, is Laird Schaub talking about Delegate or Die. And I'm just putting in the chat here the link to the web chats on the Coho US website. So you can see the schedule of what's coming. You can also see links to the stuff that has already happened. And then the last thing is I'm going to just put in a little link here. If you would like to donate to the association or even become one of our fancy new Evergreen members, I put a link into the chat there. So I think that's all that I have. Thank you so much, Shelly, and thank you all for being here.
Good. All right. Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.